Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Curse, and Purrs. My name's Leslie, and we have reached the final segment for the Vampire Lestat. When I started this out, I did not anticipate this book, I don't want to call it discussion, taking up so many segments, but there's just so much that happens in the Vampire Lestat. It's just jam-packed of with things happening because we are following such a unhinged, impulsive character. So I genuinely feel season 2 Louis when he says that he's like wrestling with time. That's all I've been doing is trying to wrestle with this material and the time that I have. So I'm just gonna go ahead, gonna jump in, and we'll see how this goes. The early education and adventures of the Vampire Lestat, Part 6, on the Devil's Road from Paris to Cairo. All right. So last this is basically the departure from the theater. Lestat and Gabrielle, they're going to leave the vampires behind. Things are awkward between like Lestat and Nikki. Um Lestat says that he thinks Armand's okay with accepting the keys to the tower, the money for the theater, and even takes over like the space that's slotted for Lestat in the theater. Um, of course, I feel like sometimes Lestat really can't see past himself and his consequences because he does things, and I don't know if he just thinks that consequence doesn't exist. It's wild. Because he thinks that him and Armand are okay, but I mean, Armand was in a cult for so long. How could you think someone's just gonna like be okay? Anyways, so what I really love is the attorney, Rogent, um, for Lestat, because he writes letters about what the vampire troop were up to. And I just find it so funny. Like, it just tickles me that this attorney is like completely fine that they're vampires. I mean, I get that he accepts that Lestat is a vampire, but he really also accepts, he clearly knows what's going on and he's cool with it. And it just like, it tickles me to no end. We do get a sense that Nikki is difficult to manage, and Armand is just like apparently doing his best to make sure that he keeps them less unhinged. The French Revolution takes place. Sometimes Lestat treats Gabrielle like a doll at this time. Like, she does have her times where she'll go off on her own and then come back, and then he'll be like fixing her hair, dressing her up, and taking her to the opera. And that does remind me of a couple of things. That reminds me of how he treated Claudia like a doll. And this is a grown woman and he still treats her like a doll. But the fact that he takes her to operas, that also reminds me what he did to um I'm so like meshing the book and the show. But like even in the show, when things went awry with Louis, Stat would say, "Let's go to an opera," and it's like, yeah, you keep trying to fix things with doing things that you want to do, and it's still not. That's not how it works. um, Gabrielle talks about how maybe God exists and Satan is a man-made invention to control society, and I really like that, how through these different characters and Rice is toggling like all these different like belief system and philosophies, because she is someone that um seemed like very much an atheist, but now that she's a vampire, there's like this whole other um side of herself she's opening herself up to. Um so Lestat and Gabrielle, they travel the world, and but again, slowly they're starting to separate. Um Gabrielle is spending more and more time away. And then I just wanted to pop on to page 296. And so yeah, Gabrielle and does kind of want to leave, and like Lestat is asking Gabrielle to stay. And this is from Lestat. He goes, "Nonsense, really. Very like the fairy tale where the princess gives her selfless love to the prince who is enchanted, and he is himself again, and the monster no more. Only in the dark fairy tale I would pass right into my mortal lover. We would become one being, and I would be flesh and blood again. And I think this is just this fantastical idea and codependent idea that Lestat has. And I feel like that's also something that he very much projects and wants from Louis, which we see in the interview with the vampire. Eleni writes of Nikki's increased public outbursts, which leads Armand to take like desperate measures, and it's absolutely horrifying. And then that's on page 299. And I just had gotten to the point where I was like, I have to read this because this is like horrifying. Our oldest friend, maddened by the excesses of our violinist, finally imprisoned him in your old residence. And though his violin was given to him in his cell, his hands were taken away. So basically, Armand's version of um, stopping him because he's so like obsessed with playing the violin was to take his hands, to starve him, trap him, and yeah, that wasn't going to go well. So um Nikki just decides to jump into the flames. He was unwell in life, and then he was unwell as a vampire, and so they do have this kind of like ritualistic um performance of him leaving and deciding to take himself out, which is just absolutely terrifying. And this is something that like Lestat and Gabrielle were meditating on. And so Lestat says something like, you said that his father, to Gabrielle, he said that his father was so angry with him for his violin playing that he was threatening to break his hands. Do you think we find our destiny somehow, no matter what happens? And I thought that was so um, poignant and important that we see that this happened in this story, because I'm pretty sure this is what we're going to see in season 3, but also how the writers of the television show picked up on this and made sure that the way that they handled Claudia and season 1 and season 2 mirrored this idea. Because what happens in the television show is that Claudia gets saved from a fire that was basically it's like Louis' fault the fire happens in the first place, but he like saves her, but in the end she dies by fire anyways, and they're just like making that connection that yeah, you did this thing, you made this person a vampire, but their demise was inescapable, and that's truly sad because that's Lestat also has some unhinged thoughts later on, like basically what I have to do is just um find a way to curtail whatever my destiny is supposed to be. However you want to look at that. So Lestat's family all died except for his dad, who relocates to New Orleans, which we know because we read Interview with the Vampire. And once Lestat plans to travel to his father, that really is like the nail in the coffin between him and his mother. She's like, don't go follow that man. Um, so they end up just going their separate ways. And Lestat continues to travel through Cairo, Egypt, and that is when he comes across Marius. And he has basically been traveling, especially even with the time with his mom, like a cumulative of like 10 years. I find this interesting because if you look at the map, I probably should have brought it out, but the map of like Italy and Egypt, there it's like not a long there's like a body of water between them. And I think it's like fascinating that Armand, from his point of view, everything happened to him so quickly when he was young, and then he fell under this cult. And I just feel like if he really cared about Marius that much and felt like he questioned if Marius was really dead, he could have put some effort into finding Marius. I just think that's kind of wild that Marius wasn't really that far from him. But yeah, so that's that. And then that enters to the next section. The Early Education and Adventures of the Vampire Lestat, Part 7, Ancient Magic, Ancient Mysteries. Marius takes Lestat to like this undisclosed location, and at some point, Marius does give Lestat his blood. So now, I mean, Lestat was made by an incredibly powerful vampire, and under like the coven rules, he shouldn't have been made. And now he's drunk from Marius, so now he's like uh, next level strong. And Marius is the one that made Armand, so that's pretty wild. So what I did find interesting was that Marius does explain like why he's even talking out loud instead of just showing him his memories. And I think this is really locks into the theme of season 1 and season 2 of the television series. So on 330, Maria says, "Thoughts are imprecise," he said. "If I open my mind to you, I cannot really control what you read there. And when I read your mind, it is impossible for me to misunderstand what I hear or, misunderstand, yeah, what I hear or see. I prefer to use speech and let my mental faculties work with it." And so there's a couple of things there going on. One is that he wants to control the narrative, which is something that Louis wants to do in season 1 and season 2 of the television show. But also, season 1 was memory is a monster. Season 2 is memory is the monster. And so we're also getting an idea that, from Mars's perspective, it's more about controlling the narrative. But all on the television show is also kind of talking about like how memories are can be fractured and malleable, so they're not always like the most uh, most accurate of way to tell a story, right? Ultimately, I think Mariah sees quite a bit of himself in Lestat, because they were both, I guess, created at the shifting part of eras. And so like, well, I'll tell you about that for Marius later, but he goes on to say, "You have come into being at the end of an era. I was born and grew to manhood in the time when the ancient world, as we call it, was now coming to a close." And I also think that, oddly enough, I think because they are made during those times, it's also why they're so resilient, because they're not really they're not in an era that could put them like in a time capsule in a way that would make it hard for them to transition to another era. They're created in transition, so they're okay with transitioning as the world changes around them. At least it's kind of like the idea that I was thinking about. So because Lestat made an effort to even like try to find answers, Marius feels like he's worthy of giving answers. So Marius takes him to those who must not be kept. And it's a beautiful place. Marius's place has like artifacts. It's just like, for me, I think it would be like a dream. So those who must be kept are alive and moving. It's scary. We realize that they're called those who must not be kept because they can't just be buried. They're breathing. They can't really consent to be putting under the earth, as vampires do from time to time. So he's just there watching over them to protect them. And these beings are like marble, and they live so long that they no longer need to drink blood. Lestat feels, and this is the thing that I want to discuss, so let me know what you think. Lestat feels like this connection to Akasha, and Akasha does reveal her name to him, and Lestat is moved to kiss her, and she is this like unmoving being, but I get the sense that she's allured by Lestat, and so it's like I think it's actually the opposite. She's alluring him to her, if that makes any sense. But I mean, in that moment, Lestat's engaged with Akasha more than Marius ever has and all the time, and I think this like creates a little bit of an unrest for Marius. So he takes Lestat away. He's like, okay, let's make sure you're gonna. This is enough for right now. This is a lot. And Marius goes on to tell his story, and what he knows of the origins of the vampires. That basically the as far as he knows, the creation of the vampires was like an accident, and that Akasha and Nikhil got wrapped up in trying to deal with a demon spirit, basically, and some other people got involved and like stabbed them, so the spirit like went within them, and then they became these beings. That's like the gist of it. And this also leads Marius to say that like this is what he's been doing this whole time, is protecting them, and that they're not only is their existence accidental, but Marius has no true purpose. Like no one has no true purpose, and no one really has any place. And I kind of feel like that self-acceptance is worth being able to transition through time, as where Lestat has been grappling this whole time, along with Nikki, with finding purpose, right? That's so much of their human existence. That's part of why Lestat was so miserable, right? When he was alive, was because I think he just felt like useless and like aimless in a way. And so Marius says, basically just advises Lestat, because he knows that about his dad. He goes, just go to New Orleans, start your own family there. Don't make other vampires and consider them like a coven. Just like live a life. You've lived so little life, and there's so much more to live. Like leave all this behind. And this is like this is a place that's like, I guess you could say, up and coming, and that don't have other like vampires there. So there's just like a level of freedom beyond what he's already been through in Paris, right? There's not a common stronghold on them. And also something that I find from the point of view of Marius, and I'm like, it's like an insult, and also like this I don't know, compliment to women, but I don't know how to feel about this. It's like almost like misogynistic. But he does comment on Lestat's mom, and he goes, I don't know, he said, Gabrielle defies my understanding, not my experience. She's too like Pandora, which is another vampire, but I never understood Pandora. The truth is most women are weak, but they mortal or immortal, be they mortal or immortal, but when they are strong, they're absolutely unpredictable. And I love the idea that a woman can only be one. They can either be weak or like untamable in a way. And so let me know what you think about that assessment from Marius, because I don't know what to say about that other than women of this time were not allowed to do anything either. So like what do you expect when they're given like a sense of freedom? Something that Marius points out to Lestat is something that it carries on through the lore of the books that I don't think they're doing in the show, but which I like the change, is that the more vampires Lestat makes, or vampire makes, they're really like, I guess, thinning out their powers. And so this also would explain why Louis and Claudia were just like weak in their powers, was because Lestat had already made Nikki, and who else? He made Nikki, and then he made his mother, and then he goes on to make Louis, and then he makes Claudia, and then he makes, I don't know if the character had a name, but Antoine. in such a short period of time that long term, Anne Rice is basically saying this is why Louis has such a problem adjusting to being a vampire because he's actually so human, in this kind of like mechanical way of explaining it. Um, I kind of don't like that. I like who Louis is, and I like that it's a part of. I want it to be more part of their character rather than having like a vampiric uh, way to contextualize how human the character is, if that makes any sense. So I kind of feel like they're changing that on the show. Hopefully that's something that they stick to, but there's always time to change and explain, like Anne Rice did with this book. So we'll see what um what they do with it. But also with that warning, he even tells us that don't make a vampire as long as I did. Don't learn from my lesson. And because Armand was 16 and he's like, he was too young. I shouldn't have done that. But what does Lestat do? He has such a warning over and over again not to do that. He already heard the rules from the coven. He's hearing it from Marius right now. And we already know he still goes and makes Claudia. You just do whatever you hear one thing and then you do the opposite. That's Lestat in a nutshell. And speaking of doing whatever they want, Marius has to attend to some business and he's like, hey, Lestat, I'm going to go off. I'll be right back. I'll make sure that there's food for you when you wake up. Don't go into the sanctuary. And what does he do? He wakes up and the neck. And what does he think? He says something like he thinks vanity, and he has this wild idea. And he takes the violin that used to be Nikki's that he's been keeping with him, and he goes and plays for Akasha and Enkil. And Akasha is moved by this music, and they end up like locking together. And Akasha and Lestat are like drinking from each other. And as we know, we've read this is like the second book. Drinking from each other is a very like erotic thing. And so Enkil did not like this. He was not having it, and he could easily like squash Lestat like a bug. And Marius comes right in time to intervene. And so Marius pulls him away and is like, "What the heck? Why did you do this thing?" And Louis, I keep saying Louis. Lestat is such a brat because he just keeps crying and apologizing, and that is just Lestat is wild. Sometimes I don't get him. He's crying for. It's like after he did something that he clearly knew he wasn't supposed to do. It's just wild. So basically, Mars is like, this is too much. Like too much has happened, and he's got to go. And Lestat leaves. He has to. There's no getting around that. So, and then the rest is history, right? We get Interview the Vampire, which leads us basically to our epilogue. Interview with the Vampire. Something that Lestat laments on is that Nikki and Louis are so similar, but ultimately, we've seen the tumultuous relationship with Nikki, but ultimately, according to Lestat, when it came to Lestat and Louis' relationship, they really like mirrored the love that they had for each other. And we wouldn't know that because we read Any Vampire, and that is not the tale that um, Louis told. But also, we do have an understanding that there's like the seething hatred for Lestat and Interview the Vampire, and by the end, we realize it's just because Louis loved Lestat so much. And so I think that speaks to the intensity of their love, because he also said that he loved, as we read this book, Nikki so much, and it still does not compare to his love for Louis. And something else that there's so many excuses that Lestat makes for what he did, and a lot of them he does admit, like, I was wrong about. But one of the things that I found interesting that I'm hoping maybe the television show might like crack open a little bit, as far as actually like Lestat saying it to the audience, is why he didn't really reveal all his powers to Louis. And I actually felt like that was like the rare justification because we know so much about Louis and how he was at that time. And Lestat says, I never revealed to him half my powers, and with reason, because he shrank in guilt and self loathing from using even half of his own. Even his unusual beauty and unfailing charm were something of a secret to him. And I also wonder if that's like kind of like the religious undertones that I just don't know enough about, but there's definitely like a lot of self hatred that Louis had. And I feel like this is the only one that feels like it makes sense as a reaction to how Louis was not coping well with being a vampire. What we do learn is that, like, at some point, Lestat did go to Armand for blood, so that's why he was there in Paris for the trial. He's saying that, like, he didn't know that was going to happen. He kind of put his foot in his mouth, and Armand even tells Lestat, like, Louis is dead, Claudia's dead. Lestat has a yellow dress, and he throws Lestat off the roof. And speaking of, oh, actually, hold on. Before I go to that, when Lestat goes to Armand for help, this is another moment where Armand throws himself. Like, I'll give you this thing, but I want your our love. And this is Lestat's asking him for something, but he also rejects Armand at the same time, which is like, why don't you just? I know this is terrible to say, but why don't you just lie and like you said you'll give him the thing so you get the thing, but he doesn't. That's how much he is not interested in Armand. He's like, yuck, no. No, I'm not gonna love you. I would never do that. And I just thought that was so messed up. I was like, Lestat, you're wild, but so is Armand. Armand's a mess. Armand will do terrible things to people and still want to be loved by the people that he is terrorizing. That's Armand in a nutshell. So yeah, he throws him off, and so it takes like 2 years for Lestat to recover. And the thing is, we know that Lestat has a yellow dress, Claudia's yellow dress. This is what I'm wondering. Who had the yellow dress in the television show? Because we do see the yellow dress at the end of season 2. So I'm wondering if he got it from Lestat, if like Lestat gave it to them, and if we're gonna see that moment, or if the Telemasca had it. But that's a whole other thing. That's a question I have. But after everything that Lestat went through, he goes for a long sleep. But we do see that he starts to dream of Akasha a bit. And just because they're dreams doesn't mean that they're not of significance, right? Which takes us to Dionysus in San Francisco, 1985. We made it, everyone. We're almost done with this segment. All right. So Lestat is in 1985, looking like a rock star badass. He's making music videos. It's, back 1985, what was it? Let me not make any, basically making music videos. And so that he's garnering all these fans, but there are rumblings like vampires are warning him like, we are gonna F you up. Like, you are breaking all sorts of rules. Don't do this. And the only positive thing that really comes out of this is that Louis comes back into his life. And Louis comes back to his life because Louis is like worried. He's getting the vibes that something's gonna pop off. Which, Lestat is unhinged. He doesn't he in no way, shape, or form like registers how much danger that he's like created. And now that Louis and Lestat are reunited, like, any new vampire book has come out. The Vampire Lestat is out on top of the music videos, and there's something about these two people coming together beautifully where once they're in front of each other, all that like animosity just kind of like washes away, and their love for each other comes through. And Lestat says something really beautiful here, but it also reminded me of the book Emma. But I'll read you what Lestat says. He goes, I nodded, because he's talking about Louis. I nodded. I took a deep breath and looked away from him, wishing I could say what I really wanted to say, that I loved him, but I couldn't do that. the feeling was too strong. And that reminds me of Mr. Knightley in the book Emma. He says a line that something like, "If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more." And that was always like a breathtaking um, quote for me. And so I kind of feel like this is very similar. And I really, I just that took me that swept me away. So Louis lets Lestat know that there are bars that have like uh, they're called like the Vampire Connection. So it's like where you know, like in like a secret way, vampires know that they could like exchange information in that way. And so that's also why Louis started to become concerned because he's hearing the chatter and he thinks something's gonna happen. And I love that like in modern time it's a bars where this is happening because unbeknownst to Lestat, that's basically what he kind of created with the theater of vampires, um, because that was popping off too, right? Vampires are kind of coming in and out. But with this said, I have an idea for the third season of the Vampire Lestat. The character Daniel on the show, like in season one, he's writing his notes as a journalist, and he says something like, "Why does this guy, um, why does Rashid know how to make drinks like he used to work at Duke's?" And in season two, Daniel gets upset at the real Rashid and says, "No, I want you to make drinks like that guy. I like the way he made drinks." And I think what we're gonna season, it's gotta be coming out in season three. Is that I think Armand used to work at one of these bars, and we're gonna learn more about the vampire connection in season three. That's what I'm thinking, and that's gonna come up in memories that like Daniel hasn't uncovered yet. I think it's gonna. I really feel like that's what's gonna happen. And we also learned from Louis that in New Orleans, it's apparently Armand's territory, which is a wild thing to find out because Lestat's been there the whole time, but Armand is just being the creeper that he is, and has been actually killing the young vampires. And you know what, Armand, you're so wild. This is how wild Armand is. There's no coven anymore. This is not something he has to do. But he's just so set in his old ways and his rituals. And but also this is something that like the older vampires like Armand are doing. They're taking out the young ones. And, well, I'll leave it there. I was going to talk about Pin in the Dam, but we'll leave that there. Uh, Louis suggests because he's so like he's getting like negative vibes from this whole thing, and he just one last ditch attempt to tell Lestat like, you know what? You're gonna have a concert. Let's ditch this. Let's go do what lovers do and throw this whole idea of a concert away. And Lestat just can't do it. Lestat is just too chaotic and he enjoys the attention too much to put this off, right? Even though this is impulsive, pure chaos, but then again, they've both participated in like this unhinged behavior between publishing both their books, right? So, so Lestat continues with his plan, and vampires during the concert start bursting into flames, right? And also, vampires are also trying to attack Lestat, right? And so Louis is there. He's trying his best to protect Lestat, and suddenly, a badass vampire swoops in with a Porsche, apparently, and it's Gabrielle. Gabrielle pops in, and she has tells Louis like get that man, restrain him because he's just so like stuck in the chaos of things. And Gabrielle gets him out. So Louis and Gabrielle like grab Lestat and they take off. Um, and so Gabrielle says the same thing. She's like, "We are in danger. Like, Lestat, you in danger, girl. Don't do this shit." And like, but anyway, so it's done. They're like they're on safe grounds. There's not much else they could do but go to sleep. Um, and as soon as Lestat starts to fall asleep, and when it comes to like getting in the coffin, there's this heaviness to like the sun coming in. So it's not like they could really fight falling asleep. It's something that just occurs to them. It's something that they could really fight against. And he sees like flickers of Marius trying to get a hold of him, and he's trying to warn him that like basically Akasha is the one that's up to this. And right as he starts falling asleep, Akasha puts her like arm on his shoulder, but it's too late and he's asleep. And that's how the book ends. Book ends on an absolute cliffhanger, which actually I didn't remember. I remember when I read this that like um they burst into flames, but that was it. There's another section for the Prince Lestat in the back. I'm not gonna read that. I don't want to spoil it. I'm not. That's a book's way later, way later. I do have a copy, but I'm not reading it yet. So I love by the end of this, we're hearing everything that Lestat went through, and he's still an agent of chaos. Like all we learned is that Lestat's gonna do whatever he wants to do and doesn't think about consequence. He doesn't think about like what he what he's doing could potentially hurt him, and he also doesn't consider that what he does could potentially hurt anyone else in his life. He's just like, and that's what drives me crazy about him. By the end, is that he's like, "Well, I didn't know. I didn't think about anyone else." And I'm like, "Yeah, Lestat. Of course, he didn't think about anyone else. You never think about anyone else." So yeah, this has been such a wild, and great time to discuss this book. Um, I wish I had some kind of summarizing thoughts at the end. The next book is Queen of the Damned. I don't know when I'm gonna read that. Maybe it might be December, but it is already November 17th, and I need to like get back on my focus on Tommy Orange train. And yeah, so I'm really focused on that. There are a couple of books in December I might like cut short because there's just too much going on. There's also just a transition time of, get prepping for like next year. Anyways, I'm rambling because I'm recording this late at night. Anyways, if you have found yourself watching all three of my segments on this, thank you so much for tuning in. Um, if there's anything in particular you want to discuss regarding this book, go ahead and just drop it in the chat and I'll respond. Um, I think I'm just kind of like at the point where I'm in a fever dream and so much happened. I don't know how they're going to wrap this up on in season 3. I wonder if what they're going to do is so much of what we get. I know we're going to get Akasha in season 3 too, but I wonder if it's going to be another like truncated experience and then have it fleshed out in season 4 if they get to Queen of the Damned. I'm hoping. I'm always crossing my fingers because I love the adaptation so much that I'm just keep chapping in it. Anyways, I'm running on fumes, so I think I'm just babbling. And my cat just came in because she's annoyed that I'm not giving her attention. All right, I love you all. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe, like, and definitely comment below because I'm doing this because I want to engage and talk about the Vampire Lestat because I got to talk about it with somebody. I cannot read these on my own because people in my life like aren't really into vampires. So this is also why I like being on the tube because I gotta let it. This is my outlet. I gotta let it out. All right. Thank you, everyone. You have a lovely night, and I'll see you in the chat.